Welcome back to another episode of Compliance Chronicles. We're getting used to this now. We've done a bit of preamble. We're starting to get used to the flow of things, setting up our microphones, cameras. Finally, I think we're in a bit of a flow that we understand what we're doing. And this particular episode is one that Ray wanted to do. It's about audits. And I didn't want to do this episode. And the reason I didn't want to do it is because I think it's boring for the average listener. Ray's going to hate me for saying this. I'm not pitching it very well, but I think it's boring for the average listener. I think that I think compliance has a bad name in terms of it's the worst name you can give a department anyway. It sends the wrong message. And then now we're opening audits into this. I think that for you guys listening, it has the potential to be boring, and that's why I didn't want to do it. So yeah,
but look, listen,
there's the intro.
I think our job in this, if you want to call it that, our job in this podcast is to make the discussions we talk about less boring and actually maybe interesting. And I think we've done well to now in the topics and subjects we discussed. And I felt like this is a subject that actually is close to our hearts. But actually, with that being said, it means a lot of things to a lot of different people when you talk about audits. And actually, can we bring some actually clarity in actually what an audit is? Can we bring some clarity in actually how you can be successful in an audit? And, going through some of the things we've experienced and seen, we've had the fortunate experience of being both the regulator and the regulated. So can we bring this experience in home and actually make it a bit fun for those who are listening? So that's why I felt it would be a good episode.
I'm looking forward to seeing how you're going to make audits and this conversation around audits.
Maybe not fun. That's maybe a strong word.
Entertaining and, well, you said fun. So
look, listen, guys, I think if you stick with us for this episode, right to the end, I guarantee there'll be at least 3 things you guys can take from this episode, which you can implement in whatever business area that you work in moving forward positively. So that's what I think. That's my bold statement. And before we go and dive into the episode, I also want to thank all the listeners who have liked, who have subscribed, who have commented so far. The feedback we've been given, it's been overwhelming, and we really, really appreciate it. One thing that we continue to ask is that you comment on our podcasts, you engage and help us actually create content that you want to hear. I think, as a new podcast series, we want to make sure we can get out to as many people, and by liking, by commenting, and by subscribing, you allow the algorithms of the YouTube and Spotify to work, and for us to reach a wider audience. So yeah, that one favor we ask from you.
That was a long request. That's the end of the episode. So go. You wanted to talk about audits then? So get us started. I know you were going to send me across some points that you wanted to go through, and I said, don't send me anything. Yeah. I'll do a little bit of, tiny bit of research in what might come up, but otherwise, I just want to talk because this is your discussion.
I think the first thing I wanted to just delve into was an introduction, a breakdown of actually what an audit is. Fundamentally, what it is, what does it mean, how does it differ, what types of audits are there, what levels of audits are there, and break it down for those who may experience audit in the various guises that they come in. So, like if I asked you what an audit is, what would be your answer?
Oh God, a ton of stress. Okay, so I would liken audit to having a colonoscopy, right? I would liken it to that. You've
had them before?
Well, look, let's not go into that. It's invasive.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable. And you're hoping that there's no outcome, there's no negative outcome at the end, right? And that is exactly how I would describe an audit, because no matter how good you think you are, no matter how prepared you think you are for an audit, there is always a risk that something is going to come up. You never know what skeletons are in the closet. You never know what you've missed through your internal policies and procedures. So that's what I would liken it to. I just think that they're highly stressful times for everyone involved. I'm not talking about just the compliance teams. Everyone involved in an audit and involved in a business that's going through an audit, CEOs, directors, owners, all the way through to people that are doing the day-to-day tasks. It is a very stressful time. So I would describe it as challenging, and like receiving a colonoscopy. So
look, fundamentally, an audit of whatever type it is, because it means different things to different people, right? Is essentially an exam. Yeah, it's an examination of yourself, of your business, of your department, as to whether you are doing what's required or asked of you, whether you're doing what you say you're doing, and how you're evidencing what you say you're doing. And so, if we take the audit purpose, which is to identify gaps, weaknesses, areas for strengthening, actually, it shouldn't be a time that is stressful if you do it the right way. It
No, but
should.
that's not true.
I know. It should,
You
I know.
that's
I
not
know,
true.
and that's why I wanted this episode so we can try and unpack that and
Okay.
potentially look at ways actually as a culture when we talk about business in any industry in any sector, we can approach compliance to transform it from this perception of actually being a pressured one time exercise to actually something that's continuous, something that's actually part of the
But
business
you know what?
framework.
I don't want to disagree with you, but I think that there isn't a way that you can change. The moment you get told, you get notified, you're having a regulatory audit, whether it's the FCA, the UKGC, the SRA, whoever it is, whatever industry you're in. The moment you get that notification, you're having an audit. You're gonna. There's going to be a moment of panic, even if you know or you believe you're perfectly prepared.
But look at this, like, right. So there's different types of audits. Yeah? If we start in terms of what type of audits are there, we can break it down into actually different types. So you have like a financial audit, you have an operational audit which tests again the effectiveness and efficiency of your operations. Financial audit will obviously do that, test your accuracy and reporting of your financial data. You have a compliance audit, like you said, will test against how you comply with regulation, how you're meeting your obligations under the regulatory framework that you're operating under. You could have a forensic audit, right, which is something that we've worked and done and been part of, working in UK law enforcement and actually testing forensically information to identify potential fraud, criminality, and things like that. And you can even have like an IT or cybersecurity audit. And the question is, I don't think every type of audit is viewed the way you're viewing it. And if it is that case, which I think it is, why is it that way? Why is it certain types of audits potentially are viewed differently to other types? And so if you break it down again from the types of audits, you've got different levels of audits, right? You have let's say external or regulatory audit from the regulatory body or the legislator, whoever that may be. Then you have like an external audit, which is an independent one from somebody who's external to the business, who gives you an independent viewpoint. Then you have an internal audit, right, which is the one is done by your company internally, mock audit or whatever way you want to discuss it and guise it. They are, if they're approached in the right way, I think those levels of audits will ultimately mean if you do have a compliance audit. So we will go and obviously focus on compliance audits through this episode because that's where we have mainly gained our experience and our knowledge from or in. But I think there's a difference of perception in those different types of audit environments. So how can we take the good parts out and try to weed the bad part? Take the good parts and weed the bad parts out.
So what's the question you're asking?
Why do I think there's a difference in the perception of different types of audits?
Yeah, I mean, look, so an audit, like you just said, without repeating what, the comment you made, an audit is going to vary based on the industry and it's going to vary based on the country as well. So you can have an industry, and a perfect example of that, we specialize and we've worked for a long time in the gambling industry. So a perfect example will be the gambling industry. The regulations around gambling can vary drastically from country to country. If you look at the UK as a perfect example, from my perspective, probably one of the better regulators, if not the leading regulator when it comes to being able to oversee and implement good practice within a market. And then you have other jurisdictions, let's call it what it is. Say that Curacao, for example, not as highly regulated. They allow for much more flexibility. So you can have the same industry, two different countries, very different forms of regulation, which means very different forms of audit and expectations and outcomes from an audit. I don't think there is a way in my. So if you have then an internal audit, the reason that would be a little bit more comfortable and a little bit less stressful is because of the repercussions. The repercussions of a full compliance assessment from any external regulator, FCA for example, you're going to get, if something negative is found, there's going to be a financial penalty. If it's an internal audit and something negative is found, you're not going to get a financial penalty. So the stress is higher because you've got, I think we touched on this in probably one of our first ever episodes around, I think it was the mental health one, and it links into this. It's that burden of risk that is on the shoulders of compliance. And I'm saying it again because in an audit, even though there are so many departments involved, if it all goes wrong, rightly so, the compliance department, you've got questions to answer. Why didn't you spot this?
But then why does the business, if there's so much burden of risk on that external regulatory audit, why then do firms, again, because it's not just, gambling firms. We've worked with different firms across different industries, right? So financial services, for example. Why then is that internal audit not treated then with the same level of, let's say, priority, or same level of
Pressure?
not pressure. I don't want to the word, not pressure. The same level of importance. So you're saying it's a little more relaxed, for example?
No. So definitely not more relaxed in the sense that there is less pressure because of the outcome. For example, if I do an internal audit, I treat it exactly the same as an external audit. If I'm leading, for example, if I'm the auditor, I will be auditing to the same standards as an external regulator. That is my aim. So the members involved, and including myself, should feel the exact same amount of pressure, and it should feel real. It should feel like an external audit. But also at the same time, the stakes are very different. If it goes wrong, you create an internal audit report at the end of it, and then your focus is on, I've got to go and fix this. Now, if you look at financial services as a perfect example, if you go and do an internal audit, let's say you're the MLRO and I'm going to audit our financial crime compliance. At the end of it, I found some areas of improvement here. You know that you can go and fix them before an external audit. But when an external audit is taking place and they find those exact same things, there is no time to fix it because automatically the FCA are going to say you failed this, this and this. We're giving you a financial penalty of 20 million. Yeah, I'm using the extreme scenario. So I think you can try to treat an internal audit the same way. And I think that in most companies we work with, they take internal audits very seriously. And the same with external audits, not from a regulator, from like an outsourced entity. I think they take them very seriously. But the fact is, they're always going to feel a little bit less pressurized because you know that the outcome, the risks are far superior if it's in a regulatory audit.
Okay, so I think we'll dive into a bit more later on why firms are still identifying things as a surprise in that regulatory audit if there's internal audit taking place or independent audits taking place. So we'll dive into that. But okay, then based on your view on audits, or your perception that it's boring or no one wants to listen, let's tell me then, what is it for then, in your opinion, and why is it crucial?
Which ones? Internal, external, or just in general?
The general, and that's what I want. I want the listener to leave this episode just thinking audit and having that holistic view that actually, regardless of whether it's a internal audit, external audit, regulatory audit, that audit, what is the purpose of an audit fundamentally, and why is it crucial?
Oh, listen, without audits, we are left with basically chaos in every single industry, because audits exist for the simple fact that firms, I'm trying to think of a nice way of putting it, but then they cannot be trusted to just regulate themselves. So an audit is the best way to do that. If it's an internal audit, you're checking that you're compliant with regulations. If it's an external audit, you're checking that that business is compliant with regulations, with the ultimate aim of you're protecting the public, protecting consumers. So audits are essential. I actually love audits. So I'm a massive I'm a huge champion of audits. I think that they are one of the best tools that you can have internally, and I think one of the best tools that a regulator has. And I empathise with regulators in terms of how they are perceived. But to answer your question, I think they're probably the most vital tool that you have in your arsenal to protect the business and to protect an industry.
And so that's a perfect answer to kind of segue into my next question, which is then, if there's such a crucial value adding tool to the business, why are they so feared then? Is it because there's a misconception? Why are they so feared, audits?
But I've answered this. It's because of the consequences. That it's the simple answer. Because of the consequences, you can prepare for an audit until you're blue in the face. Yeah, you can prepare and think that you've captured everything. I am perfectly open about this. I have failed in preparing for audits before. I have, many years ago, worked on audits where I thought, I've got this firm protected, and an external audit has taken place, and I've gone, oh crap, there's a chance I may have missed something here. But you know what? A valuable lesson was learnt that day. And I think anybody listening to this who works in compliance has probably had that same experience. We've discussed this before about the gambling industry, and I know you'll probably come on to this later on. But the fact is that we work with a lot of good gambling companies. We work with a huge amount of good financial service organizations. I don't think that they're intentionally non-compliant. I think that when something gets picked up in a regulatory audit, they genuinely believe they were compliant, but an audit detected something that they've just missed, and it can happen. It's so easy to happen. I don't think there's negligence in many cases. I think it's just things are even missed, and I think that fear exists because look at the fines that are handed out. They're not small. Financial services. I know you said you were going to research some statistics, so I'm not even going to try and guess them, but you were researching some statistics, and I would venture a guess that in financial services that the fines in 2024 were in the high hundreds of millions.
I think maybe it was gambling sector, but it was definitely fines. I think the gambling sector was 100 million in fines in 2020. So
then I would say financial services probably over 200 million because their fines are much higher, not as frequent, but much higher in value. So of course you're going to be scared because you don't want to be the person that is responsible for a company getting a fine. And I'm not saying that from a compliance perspective. Anybody in the company, let's say somebody in IT misses something. Let's say somebody in customer service done something incorrectly. You mentioned other sectors as well. Let's think outside the box. Manufacturing. Mm-hmm. When manufacturing companies are audited for quality control, for example, it only takes one person to mess up on the production line. You could fail an audit. That could cost you millions. You can have your manufacturing business, shut down for 24, 48 hours while you remediate that problem. You want to be that guy that's responsible for that? So of course, there's fear. Yeah,
I mean, and you talk about these different industries, and you have, again, there's auditing in all these industries, from healthcare, like I said, to manufacturing, to insurance, to as you mentioned already, financial services. So, what then do you think is the biggest misconception about audits that's causing people to still have yes, the reality is that you can get a fine, but the reality is if you get in your car today, you can get hit by another car, you can get run over, but ultimately nobody fears getting into their car and driving and driving that car. So why is there a fear of actually going into an audit?
I mean, when you put it like that, it makes sense. But I would say, so to answer your question around misconception, I think the misconception is, and it's funny because when we had Jacob on, the sales guy, recently, he said that internally sales teams have a misconception that the compliance department is out to get them. And I think that there is a misconception from firms that the regulator is out to get them.
Okay.
And that's not the case. We work closely with regulators, and links into what I was saying earlier is that I'm highly empathetic towards them because they are not out to get anyone. They've been given the role of check on these firms, check on these companies, make sure they're compliant, because otherwise customers are at risk. Otherwise there's risk of financial crime, terrorism, etc. So they've got a really their task is almost as stressful as the guys being audited, because if they miss something and that firm goes on to be the reason that somebody was able to launder money that led to human trafficking, well, why did you miss that in your audit? Why did you not detect that they had poor AML measures in place? So I would say the misconception that exists the most is that auditors are out to get people, because it's just not the case.
Okay, but let's talk about the tone of audits then. Let's talk about how the tone of audits potentially has changed over time, over the last decade or so. Because if we take, for example, the FCA, yeah, and the authorization revocations that have taken place over the last year, which is over 1,200 authorizations they've revoked from financially regulated firms.
Can for our listeners, what does that mean? Authorization being revoked from firms.
So, thank you. So when a firm applies to to conduct business under financial services business, so in the UK, they have to get an authorization or a license.
And this is a license that allows them to conduct payments, transfers, remittances, etc. Okay.
Exactly. And obviously, if there's any serious failings or issues with the operations of that business or compliance to the regulation of that firm, they can have their authorization revoked. And last year there was over 1,200, I think 1,231 in total. Don't quote me.
That's a lot.
But that's double the year. That's double the year before. So, and if you're looking at even at the last 7 or 8 years, I think 2017-2018 financial year, it was 208 revocations. So in the space of 7 or 8 years, that's times 6 or 7x in terms of the amount of revocations. So you just talked about kind of that perception that the regulators get out to get them. Are they?
No, because so then interesting stats. But I would imagine the amount of companies that have applied for payments, investments, licenses has also 6, 7, 8x over that period of time. If you look at the amount of challenger banks that exist, challenger mortgage brokers, so I don't know the figures, but maybe that percentage increase aligns to the amount of people that have applied for licenses. So I would want to look into that first. Then I would say, is that a sign that the regulator is out to get them, or is that a sign that companies are being granted, that there's a problem with the licensing granting stage, so that perhaps firms are being granted licenses too quickly, too hastily, and then the failings are only being detected in an audit, and perhaps more scrutiny should have been applied at the application stage, and they should have just not been given a license as opposed to giving it to them and then revoking it. Fair
enough. I mean, I think I'm not saying that that's the case, and to be honest, I do feel that there's been an improvement on how regulators audit, in the sense that we've gone from a document-based auditing process. So we're looking at your documents. Are they fine? Yes, no, great. To a evidence-based audit. And I think there's one thing that one phrase you mentioned to me. I think when we started doing audit together over a decade ago, and it was like, don't tell me, show me. And I think regulators have gone from don't tell me what you're doing, show me what you're doing. And I think that's been positive. But when we are showing the regulator, do you think that now has given too much room for now a subjective audit, rather than actually audit based on actually, are you doing what we're saying you should do, rather than now, are you doing what we think you should be doing based on what we're saying?
Oh, you've worded that in such a strange way, you've confused me.
So we told you what you need to do. Based on what you need to do, are you doing it the way we're saying it? So it's like more subjective now. I think we've seen a lot more subjective auditing rather than actually the letter of the law, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're putting a positive spin on it, though. Because I would say that in line with
it could be that, like I said, I'm just putting out there. Is it a positive spin? Is it a negative spin? Is it the way it's
definitely
happening?
Positive. The way that audits take place now, and if you look at the Solicitors Regulation Authority, you look at Financial Conduct Authority, you look at the UK Gambling Commission. So I'm keeping it UK based for now, just because that's where the majority of our listeners are. But across the board, regulators are much more transparent and much more communicative than ever before. If you think back a decade ago, like you said, an audit was very paper based. Send us this, we'll take a look, and we'll give you your feedback. Whereas now it's send us this, we'll take a look at it, then we're going to come in and do an inspection, or we're going to meet with some of your staff, or we're going to look at some of the businesses that you conduct, the companies you conduct business with, to see if you're actually doing what you say you do. But then you can converse with them, you can share information, you can back up the things that you're saying with further evidence. So the transparency that has come about in the last 5 to 8 years is a huge positive. It benefits everybody. The regulator gets to understand more about what firms, operators are struggling with, what their challenges are, how they conduct business day to day. So then when they go to multiple firms, they can identify what is best and poor and bad practice. And then for operators, and operators and firms, law firms included, you now have the opportunity to back up your evidence. And I always say that within audits, I think audits can be won and lost by the people in an audit. I think that if you've got good people in an audit, then, and when I say good people, confident and competent people, it can really make a difference to an audit, because you can have the best processes in the world, best procedures in the world, best policies, best systems. But if you have somebody that's just started in the business that goes into that audit, let's say, for example, you're a challenger bank, you're very new, and therefore your MLRO is quite new. You get an audit from the FCA 4 weeks after your doors have opened. That's a really tough time for the MLRO. I would expect them to make some mistakes and get some things wrong. So they're in a situation where they're likely to lose. I'm using the word lose. They're likely to have a negative outcome of the audit because of the person that's there. So I think the transparency is improved, and because of that, the overall outcome of audits is better.
Okay, fair enough. And so, because I think one of the words that is a buzzword around where regulators are publishing or communicating is proactiveness, or being proactive in the way they're regulating now and they're conducting assessments or audits. Do you think it's a genuine proactiveness, or do you think it's just a position to be more attritional? Like you've been on both sides of the fence like me. You've been the regulator and worked for various regulators, and been regulated and had to be involved on the other side of the fence. And do you feel like the tone has changed in these assessments? Has it become more attritional or not?
What do you think? You've asked me a lot of questions. I feel like I'm being interviewed. I have my opinion, but what do you think?
Do you know what? Again, I think for me, it's dependent on the regulator. Yeah. I think some regulators have become more attritional, or they, I mean, and it's fair enough. They've become more attritional when they spot something that they don't like to see. Maybe it's because, again, there is that more transparency now. There's more accountability. There's more, I guess, awareness around actually what's needed to be done. So when they don't see it, it's quite frustrating if you're telling somebody and making it clearer for them.
Can you define attritional in this context?
Like a battle, attritional. So like a war.
No, I know the word.
Yeah.
I mean, thanks
Yeah.
for that. No, I mean, in this situation, give me an example of how you're seeing attrition.
So it's where, for example, there's a query or in an audit scenario where you're asked to, again, evidence or explain something, and then you evidence it in line with the regulation or legislation, and then the regulator will push back, and then continuously push back, and then continuously push back, looking for you to put it almost like wave the white flag, right? Almost accept defeat and failure. Where in the past, I've seen, again, a simple explanation provided to a requirement suffice for auditors, in years gone past. So again, like I said, I've been in different audits and I've experienced it from different regulators who approach it differently, but I've also been in regulatory audits where audits are approached in a bit more of an attritional way.
Yeah, I mean, same as you, I've seen two sides of it. So I would say, I play devil's advocate here. I would say that if you look at if you look at the audit processes that are followed by the Solicitors Regulation Authority, by the Financial Conduct Authority, and then most gambling operators, gambling regulators. So if you look at the audit process they follow, first of all, you get notified of an audit, right? First step. They don't just tell you they're coming. Usually there's some discussion around dates. And this is consistent across every regulator. They'll give you some flexibility around dates. Now, if you're sensible, obviously you try and pick the furthest date from the list they've given you. So that's stage one. Then they ask you for a batch of documents. Again, it might vary slightly from regulator to regulator. But if you look at the SRA, they will ask you for your typically money laundering risk assessment or business-wide risk assessment. Most gambling regulators will do the same. The FCA will do the same. Then they're going to ask you for your policies. Again, let's say it's AML focused, they're going to ask you for your AML policy, your AML procedure, and any supporting documents. Then they're going to want to speak to certain people, usually an MLRO, AML manager. And then finally, they're going to want to come in and have those conversations and test the controls. You've got 4, 5 different steps before that to make everything as clear as possible to the regulator. So if you've got to stage 6, I lost count. So if you haven't got to, if you get to stage 6 when you're having that assessment and they're looking at profiles, business profiles, customer profiles, and you're having to explain again, is that a problem for you as a business because you didn't make it clear in those 5 stages beforehand in your risk assessment, in your policies, your procedures, and in the interview? Is it your fault? Why is the regulator to blame? I'm playing devil's advocate here because I kind of agree with you. But I think you've got all of these stages to get your affairs in order. If you've got to the point where you've got to explain something, 4 or 5 times, like you said, yeah, it could be a lack of understanding on their part. Yeah, it could be a witch hunt and they're trying to find something that they can nail you for. I mean, I don't believe that's the case for most regulators.
So, okay, if we take the tone and just and build on that then. So I think, like I said, I think it's been positive in the sense that over the last 5 years, there's been an improvement in collaboration across regulation, right? So regulators are collaborating better, more with each other, which is positive, what we just discussing. And then you've also seen a shift to kind of that from like that quiet enforcement to kind of the loud and naming and shaming. That's definitely changed in tone. Where before you see big, large financial firms, banks would get millions or £100 million fine, and it would go under the radar. You probably wouldn't hear it. Whereas now, it's naming and shaming, and then you see stuff like the online gambling space. 2023 statistic was 48%, which is almost 1 in 2 online gambling operators failed their first compliance assessment. So it's looking at that and thinking, actually, the change in tone, is that a concerted effort to witch hunt, or whose fault is it that actually, as a consequence of the tone, it looks like the impact hasn't been as we wanted it to be?
Oh, you make your question so long. So what are you asking me?
So the question is, what do you feel like the impact of the tone has been? I could have just said that in 3 words, couldn't I?
That would have been so much easier. So the impact is, it's positive in the sense that standards are higher. So fines are higher, fines are more frequent, but standards are higher. So the outcome has been highly positive. If you look at the standard across the board, if you go to financial services, perfect example, you go and speak to your average AML officer, the knowledge they have on money laundering regulations, on Proceeds of Crime Act, on the money laundering directives, it's so much higher than, I remember when I first started out and, we're talking about back in, working for government days, I didn't know anything in my first few months. Like, I was trying to know stuff. And when I first joined regulated businesses, the average AML officer, and at the time, if you look at gambling, responsible gambling didn't exist. But in financial services, the average AML officer didn't have that much knowledge. Their job was, if something jumps out at me, I'll go and let my MLRO know. Mm-hmm. But that was kind of it. Now, there is an expectation that you go above and beyond. You know about this. You're doing frequent learning, training. So the outcome has been that very positive in the sense that the knowledge has increased, the competence has increased, but it's throughout an organisation. And I love that. I love that. Don't get me wrong, I would rather it wasn't because of fines and people
Yeah.
losing their operating licenses. I would much rather it was learnt a different way.
Yeah.
However, the lessons have still been learnt,
Yeah.
and for the better.
Yeah. Let's talk about that then. Let's talk about the good then. The good, the bad, the ugly, should we say, of that change in tone. For me, I think, like you said, I think there's been a lot of good that's come out of the change in tone. Number one, like you said, it's raising standards. Yeah, it's meant that there's an expectation for firms to do a lot more than just the bare minimum. The tone has changed from a tick box exercise, like you say, into this risk-based approach exercise, which allows, firms to actually understand, their risk, understand where they can strengthen, and place more value on the compliance culture. So I definitely think that's a good. I'm not sure what if you feel there's any other areas would be notable, let's say, good or improvements from the fact that we've had a change in tone.
Recruitment, it's opened up job opportunities. I would say. Sorry, I was just making a note. It's opened up job opportunities. If you think of how big in general now compliance teams are, they're huge. In many cases, compliance teams will be bigger than customer service, than trading teams. So compliance teams, and especially risk departments, are huge. So it's had a real benefit on creating job opportunities.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't actually see that, but that's definitely a consequence. I guess. And what about like the bad of audits? What would you say is the bad? For me, let me go first. I'm always ask you the questions. I would say it's a couple, but I would say definitely the more high profile, the more intense they've become as they have become, means a greater need for resources. Right? So it's become a lot more resource heavy. So you're not just having your compliance team or your compliance officers involved in audits. Now you're having wider areas of the business. So I definitely think it's become more resource heavy.
Yeah, but then is that positive? Because now you've opened the door for job opportunities. So maybe that's not bad.
I mean, yeah, no, you can. I mean, it's about putting a spin on it, right? I think, yeah, definitely it could be seen as a positive. I definitely feel like at the time though, it definitely takes a lot. It's a time consuming, yeah. So resource heavy and time consuming, and often means that as a consequence of these audits, you're now putting maybe your core day to day tasks to the side for that period of time. We used to be involved in regulatory audits for financial services and gambling space, which would take one day. Now they can take 2 weeks, and so you're out of the business for 2 weeks essentially, dealing with this audit process. So I think definitely going back to the mental health episode, it can definitely then also cause strain and stress on those involved in it.
Yeah, that's definitely a bad side. I would agree with that. I would agree with the time resource it takes for participating in an audit. I would agree with the stress, the pressure. 100%, I would agree with that. I would say that the more you do audits, the less of a problem all of that becomes. So you and I are almost quite seasoned when it comes to this, that I don't feel a ton of pressure when it comes to audits generally. And I don't feel overly stressed. No more stress than I feel on an average day anyway. So I would say the more you do them, I think the more familiar you are with the circumstances, especially with like financial services, their audits, the more you do them, and in some firms you get them every year, the more you do them with a regulator, definitely the more comfortable you feel with the scenario. You know what's going to happen. You know the next step. It might change slightly year on year, but you know what's going to happen. So therefore you feel it. I think the stress comes, the pressure comes, and the time resource side of things comes because it's the unknown. But the more you do it, it allows you more preparation. So you know an audit's coming. This might take me 2 weeks. I know that the FCA are going to give me at least 4 weeks notice.
So you can anticipate. You can anticipate
a bit of preparation can
yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
You know that that's going to be a stressful couple of weeks for you.
Sure.
Because of, like you said, the time it takes you away from things and the pressure. So you can put measures in place. So I do think that whilst there are bad things, the more you do audits and the more you prepare, like coming back to if you do more internal audits and more external non-regulatory audits, the more comfortable you get when a real audit takes place. So those negatives, those bads, aren't as bad.
Yeah. What about the costs? Because again, a stat I saw is that in 2023, this was a KPMG stat. So don't shoot me, but it was that it was in 2023 financial services spent 49 billion on conducting compliance audits.
49 billion what? Pesos?
Pounds.
Impossible. You're talking rubbish. There's no way.
So
They spent on audits.
49 billion.
What do you mean on fines?
On compliance audit, on conducting compliance audits.
On conducting preparing.
I'm assuming these will be like your external proprietary audits.
This is impossible. Where's that from?
I'm pretty sure that it was the KPMG. Yeah, KPMG.
I'm gonna check you on that because how can that be so? So in 2024, for example, the financial services penalties in terms of fines that were handed out totaled like 176 million. Why would you spend, was it 49 billion?
Yeah.
When you pay the fines?
So but that goes back to the question: is it still beneficial just to pay the fine?
Based on those stats, yeah. I'm being realistic. Yeah. If I own a bank and I know, right, if I get this wrong, I'm going to pay the financial services 20 million. Cool. But my profit is I'm going to make 100 million.
Yeah.
Well, obviously I'm going to go with that. So no, that can't be right. There's no. Why would you spend 49 billion?
I mean, not one. I'm sure it's not one firm that's.
Yeah, I know it's not one firm, but even across the board, 40. It's so much higher than the penalties that are being handed out.
Yeah, I mean, I was flabbergasted to see it. Double checked it. Took a double look and double checked it. But this is the stat that came out.
We're going to discuss this afterwards. Because actually, you know what? Where did you get it from? Have you got your phone?
I do.
I need to know this because this is important.
You have a AI now, don't you? So if you use your Siri, let's both look again. Yep.
I don't believe this. Are you checking or should
I'm checking. We both check.
Okay.
Corroboration. This is one of the things that will come out of a future episode. Making sure you corroborate the information that you obtain. Okay, I don't have much signal here. It's just terrible.
Well, in 2023, UK financial services firms collectively spent 38.3 billion. Don't get me wrong, like it's still a lot on financial. Okay, but this is on financial crime compliance audits. So you're saying
it's still compliance audit. It's still a compliance, but type of compliance audit.
38.3 billion.
So okay, I'm 10 billion out. I'm sorry, listeners.
It's not to be sniffed at. Marking a 12% increase.
That's a cup of tea for you, isn't it?
A 12% increase from the previous year and 33% from the year prior.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That is, I don't believe that. That is ridiculous. So they're spending all this money on preparing for audits, but there's still so much is going wrong.
So, and this goes back to the point. So I guess another stat, which was a 2024 stat that 71% of compliance failings, specifically from financial crime compliance failings, came from poor documentation. It didn't come from a grave failing in the controls or grave failing in actually adherence to the policy. It actually came in the fact that the policy was potentially poorly worded or poorly drafted, and you fell before you started. So how is it that then so much is being spent, but we're still seeing such simple failings?
I mean, I wish I had like a great answer that would help our listeners in terms of why we're seeing so many failings. But I think the fact is that in general, we're seeing failings because standards are higher. And they get higher every single year. The expectation from regulators is higher. We also see in that sometimes regulators can be unclear on what their expectations are. And therefore, you genuinely believe as a firm, I'm doing the right thing here. I've got a very good business risk assessment in place for my bank. But the FCA come knocking and say, well, hold on a minute. You forgot to mention in your business risk assessment that, you recently done a trade with North Korea. And all of a sudden it's like, well, hold on. You thought that everything was fine. They found something that's a glaring error. Like ultimately it's a glaring error. So I think that sometimes the penalties, what I'm getting at is sometimes the penalties can be harsh for the failing. And I will use the SRA, the Solicitors Regulation Authority, as a prime example of that. They're following a very similar audit process to the FCA and other regulators. And the fines that they've been handing out recently for basic money laundering failings, like an inadequate risk assessment, which can be something like you've said, as simple as missing, clear wording on certain things, like how you handle top earners, etc. And they're getting fined millions now. And I think that sometimes the penalties can be harsh for the issue that they've found, where perhaps instead of giving £20 million fine, you could have given a lesser fine and still sent that message to the industry that this is what we expect going forward. This is best practice. So I think, does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. And what about, I guess, the ugly? I'm sure over time we've seen, both of us have probably seen some ugly parts of audits. What would you name as the ugly parts of an audit?
I mean, are there any parts of an audit that are pretty?
The outcome.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, it depends on the outcome,
Yeah.
I suppose.
Look, I think myself and yourself, we were part of an audit maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, and this is something that I think should be part of the regulators' actual strategy, is to share best practice. Now, this audit, it went smoothly, and in fact, the regulator specifically said that was the best assessment they've actually conducted in over 14 years. Now, I don't really care about that. It was good to hear that, but actually, what I wanted is actually to have the regulator say, okay, we'll take the best practice we've identified from this and we'll share it with the industry, because again, ultimately, we want to raise the standards, and you can't. As it's not really fair to be one sustainable firm in an unsustainable environment. So really, if you raise the standards and allow everybody to be sustainable or flow in a sustainable state, then it brings the industry in line where nobody thinks they can actually get away with things that they shouldn't. So going back onto that was something that I feel that was, you said, have you ever been involved in a pleasant audit experience? And that was pleasant. But again, going back to kind of the ugly part of it, I was part of a regulatory body regulating a firm, financial services firm, and during this experience, I could see the firm becoming fragmented day upon day. So they were all united on day one. By day three, there's a complete fragmentation of the departments or the people involved in the audit, and it ultimately looked like it was very ugly at the end. You could tell it was almost a blame game, in sense of those who were at fault for potential, failings around, the consumer duty, around, well, it wasn't consumer duty, it was social corporate responsibility at that point, around, the financial crime compliance, and it wasn't GDPR, it was DPA regulations at that point again. So I think that's definitely very ugly of things I've seen. I'm not sure if there's anything else you've noticed, like the ugly of audits.
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think seeing the impact it can have on teams.
Obviously the fines, right? I guess obviously the fines, we've got obviously the obvious.
The fines are
reputational damage, I guess, as well.
Yeah, definitely. And you talk about reputational damage. I would say that's a big one. Even if you look at it from a different perspective, in terms of not just regulatory audits. So I don't know if you remember this. I don't know if it was last year or the year before, but Ernst & Young was the auditor for, I can't remember the name of them now. I think it was SCR. I'll come back to it in a minute. But anyway, they were the auditor for this company, and they, as their auditor, they had serious issues with their compliance. So they found things in their audits where they were unhappy with governance, with measures that they had around corporate controls, and Ernst & Young then resigned as their auditor. And when this got out to the public, it resulted in a 33% loss in stock for this company. I'll get the name in a minute. Yeah. It's a huge company. I wrote it down earlier. I wrote it down earlier while I was preparing.
So whilst you're
hold on.
Okay.
So yeah, it was Super Micro Computer Inc. SMCI. So because they had concerns around governance and other issues, they resigned as their auditor, and then their stock went down 33%. So as a result of non-compliance, as a result of a bad audit outcome, you didn't get fined, and you didn't, the doors weren't shut, but you lost 33% of stock.
About value of the business. Wow.
So that's huge. So
Yeah.
that's ugly. I would say
Yeah.
that's ugly. The reputational damage, coming back to
Definitely.
what you said.
Definitely. That's definitely a good example. So then let's move on to, I guess, what the listeners want to hear the most is actually what can be done then to prepare or avoid these kind of unwanted surprises when it comes to, an audit, whether it's internal, whether it's external, whether it's a regulatory audit. What can be done then to avoid these unwanted surprises?
So I'll try and simplify it.
Yeah.
Regular internal audits, number one. And they are a must-have. And when I say regular, you can define regular based on your business and size and controls.
So talk me through, when you say regular internal audits, talk me through, because, if we're honest, if you're looking at an internal audit, it could be seen as actually marking your own homework, right? It's like, if you're going to give a test and then you mark your test yourself. I think we've even had the discussion about, there was a discussion about this around football, with football fans, and the controversy we see around the VAR, video assistance refereeing, and actually how is that policed, and actually the PGMOL, who are the referees and officials, they determine actually whether the referees got it right or wrong, but they are the referees. So it's like, same with the internal audits. Explain to me how that internal audit is just not simply marking your own homework.
Okay, then. Very good point. So I'll go back a step further. Step number one, establish an audit committee. Okay, step number one. The audit committee needs to consist of people of some level of seniority and experience with audits throughout the business. So you can have directors, you can have CTOs, you can have CWOs, CFOs, you can have chief compliance officers, you can have AML officers, whoever you want in there. But there needs to be a reason for them being in there. Each person should have a justification of their role, justification of why they're on the committee and their role in the committee. Once you've established the audit committee, they will then oversee all of the internal audits. So, and we're not talking about just compliance audits. It might be a technical audit, like you said. It might be receiving ISO certifications. It might be an AI-focused audit. So the audit committee will oversee that. And then you have your internal audits, which you need to conduct regularly. And then for me, that's the simple step one. Outside of that, outside of audits, it's regularly testing yourselves. So when I say yourselves, within the compliance team, it very rarely consists of just one person. It's usually a team. It's that collaborative working where you challenge each other and you question everything. One thing that I dislike is, or I'm not a fan of, is in businesses where the questions are always asked by senior leadership. I think if you're doing a job, you need to be asking questions consistently. It's not a case of, why did you do that? Or I do it because the policy says so. You should be questioning, well, why does the policy say that? Mm-hmm. Where has that come from? What's the foundation? So that would be the two things, the internal audit and collaborative working within teams and departments.
Yeah, I agree. And I think building on that, what you said, especially with the internal audit, I think I tell every firm or every organisation that I work with, ask this question. I say, have you got an audit checklist? Have you got an audit checklist? What's that? Do you have a checklist that establishes the regulation you have to adhere to, actually how it applies to your business, the nature of your business? Actually, are you adhering to every piece of the regulation? And if so, how can you show that? How do you evidence that? And then that's how you can have that continuous. So I think an audit should be like the way we can get away from surprises is making that a continuous part of the business culture, no longer like a one-time event, but like actually a strategic tool for enhancing the business. And my other one, which I love and I'm an advocate of, is training and awareness, but also training and awareness and testing. So we do the training, you do the awareness, building awareness, but actually, are we testing that actually those individuals have taken the knowledge, have taken the learnings, and are able to apply it into their day-to-day role? And that's the testing, which I think sometimes is often missed. You do these training sessions, you might do an online test, you might do an awareness session, but actually, are you testing whether that's been applied on a day-to-day basis? And do they understand that how their procedures impact the outcome of actually being a compliant firm or company? So I think that would be
I love that. Things. So I think let's summarize that as a list. Establish an audit committee with the right people, conduct regular internal audits, work collaboratively and question everything within the business in the right way, and then
the training and awareness and audit checklist. Also, like I said, we've conducted various mock audits and various health checks, which we do through consultancy work. And every time a firm engages in a general just AML or compliance health check, we call them the MOT, right? That next audit that takes place by the regulator, they pass.
Yeah, it's true.
They pass.
Internal audits, mock audits, they're very powerful. So I think we're closing with a very good and important checklist for people. You did say that there would be 3 things that people could take away. You lied because you gave 5 tips, so which is a good thing.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good way to end it, because we're ending on a positive with a checklist.
Yeah. Build a culture of compliance, right? Like I said, build a culture of compliance. Like that compliance actually is just a base level. You know, when we talk about business and in any sector of the industry, it's about doing what's right. It's about doing what's ethical, and compliance is just there's the minimum. It's the minimum standard, really, and it's about doing better and doing more. So, yes,
I like that. That's
Thank
a good summary.
Thank you. So yes, this has been a great chat. See, I told you it'll be better.
Yeah, you changed my mind.
thought.
I perked up throughout it.
Listen, guys, we're grateful for the engagement again. You know, the comments, the subscribes. Look, continue to like, comment, and subscribe, and please do feel free to comment in some topics and conversations you'd like for us to have on the sofa next time. Thank you, guys.